History is full of people who got caught doing something terrible and then made it so much worse by trying to cover it up. We're talking governments, erasing people from photographs and somehow forgetting their shoes, politicians drinking toxic river water on live TV to prove a point and ending up in the emergency room, and a secretary performing a yoga pose so impossible it practically violated the laws of physics. These are 33 of the dumbest, most embarrassing cover-ups ever attempted, and every single one of them failed spectacularly. 1. In 2003, Iraq's information minister Mohammed Saeed al-Sahaf, better known to the world as Baghdad Bob, stood in front of live television cameras and confidently declared that American troops were nowhere near Baghdad. Not close. Not even in the neighborhood. Meanwhile, United States Army tanks were literally rolling past in the background behind him, close enough that you could hear the engines. Reporters on the scene were watching this unfold in real time, trying to keep a straight face while this man delivered the most aggressively incorrect weather report in military history. He didn't flinch. He didn't stutter. He looked those cameras dead in the lens and doubled down, claiming Iraqi forces were crushing the Americans. Baghdad Bob became an instant global meme years before memes were even a thing, proving that confidence without reality is just performance art. 2. In 1725, a respected professor at the University of Würzburg named Johann Beringer made an extraordinary discovery. He started finding incredibly detailed fossils of lizards, birds, spiders, and even celestial objects carved into limestone near his university. He was so thrilled that he published an entire academic book about them, declaring these specimens proof of divine creation. There was just one tiny problem. Two of his jealous colleagues, J. Ignaz Roderick and Georg von Eckhart, had been secretly carving these fake fossils and planting them along his hiking route just to mess with him. When their prank spiraled way beyond what they expected, they tried to stop him by planting a stone with his own name carved into it, hoping he'd realize the whole thing was fake. He didn't. Beringer published that one too. The truth only came out during the lawsuit that followed, which destroyed careers on all sides. 3. Under Stalin's regime, the Soviet Union perfected the art of making inconvenient people disappear, not just from life, but from photographs. When officials fell out of favor, got arrested, or were executed, government retouchers would literally airbrush them out of every official photo. The problem was, Soviet photo editors were apparently not great at their jobs. They'd erase a man standing in a group portrait, but leave behind a floating hand on someone's shoulder. They'd remove someone from a balcony scene but forget their hat, just hovering in midair like a ghost accessory. In one famous case, the same photo of Stalin with a group of officials went through so many rounds of editing that it eventually became just Stalin standing alone, like the world's loneliest graduation photo. Entire books have been written about these botched erasures, and every single one of them is unintentionally hilarious. 4. In 2022, the Chief Minister of the Indian state of Punjab, Bhagwant Mann, decided to personally shut down criticism about the polluted state of the Kalibane River, a sacred rivulet connected to Sikh history. His power move? He scooped up a glass of water directly from the river on camera and drank the entire thing in front of the press, as if daring anyone to question him. It was bold. It was dramatic. It was monumentally stupid. Exactly 2 days later, Mann was rushed to a hospital in Delhi with severe stomach pain widely reported to be linked to a bacterial infection. His party tried to spin it as a routine checkup, which is a bold rebranding of emergency hospitalization. The river, unsurprisingly, remained polluted. And Mann accidentally became the most convincing evidence against his own argument. 5. During the Watergate investigation in 1973, the existence of secret White House recordings became public, and one tape in particular had an 18.5-minute gap right in the middle of a crucial conversation recorded just 3 days after the break-in. When pressed for an explanation, President Nixon's loyal personal secretary, Rosemary Woods, offered one of the most physically ambitious alibis in legal history. She demonstrated what became known as the Rosemary Stretch, claiming she accidentally erased the tape by simultaneously reaching for a phone across her desk while keeping her foot on a transcription pedal. The pose required her to twist her body into a position that would make a professional contortionist wince. Photographers captured the moment, and the image went viral in a pre-internet kind of way. Experts later determined that the gap required at least 5 separate manual erasures, meaning even her Olympic-level stretch couldn't account for what happened. 6. In 2017, entrepreneur Billy McFarland teamed up with rapper J. Rule to promote the Fyre Festival, billed as the most exclusive luxury music experience on Earth. They paid top-tier Instagram influencers, including Kendall Jenner and Bella Hadid, to post mysterious orange squares and promote a Paradise Island getaway with tickets running up to $12,000. What McFarland was desperately trying to hide was that there was no festival, no infrastructure, no artists, no luxury villas. When wealthy attendees arrived on a remote island in the Bahamas, they found disaster relief tents, soaking wet mattresses, feral dogs, and the now legendary dinner. 2 slices of bread with a single piece of cheese and a side salad in a styrofoam container. One guest tweeted that photo. It went mega viral, and the entire scam collapsed in a single night. McFarland got 6 years in federal prison. 7. Sometime around the early 2nd century, Rome's legendary 9th Legion, the Legio IX Hispana, roughly 5,000 elite soldiers who had helped conquer Britain, simply vanished from all historical records. No report of a massive defeat, no memorial, no official explanation. The Roman Empire, which normally documented everything from troop movements to grain shipments, just quietly deleted the entire legion from its army lists as if 5,000 men had never existed. Modern historians believe they were likely wiped out in a catastrophic military disaster, possibly during a campaign in northern Britain or perhaps later in the Middle East. But the point is, Rome's strategy for handling this embarrassment was essentially the ancient equivalent of quietly deleting a bad social media post and hoping nobody screenshots it. Spoiler, historians noticed. The mystery of the lost 9th Legion has fascinated people for centuries. 8. Milli Vanilli, the Grammy-winning pop duo of Rob Pilatus and Fab Morvan, were one of the biggest acts of the late 1980s. Their debut album sold millions, their music videos were everywhere, and their hit Girl You Know It's True was inescapable. What nobody knew was that Rob and Fab never actually sang a single note on any of their records. Their producer, Frank Farian, had used completely different studio vocalists and just put 2 good-looking guys in front of the cameras. The cover-up worked beautifully until a live performance in 1989, when the backing track started skipping during a concert at a venue in Connecticut, repeating the phrase, "Girl, you know it's over and over and over again," while Rob and Fab stood on stage, with their mouths not matching anything. They literally ran off stage. The fallout was nuclear. Their Grammy was revoked, lawsuits piled up, and Milli Vanilli became shorthand for fraud. 9. In April 1961, the CIA launched the Bay of Pigs invasion, a covert operation to overthrow Fidel Castro using Cuban exiles. To maintain the fiction that the United States had absolutely nothing to do with it, the CIA painted American B-26 bombers in the colors of the Cuban Air Force and even gave them fake Cuban military serial numbers. Brilliant plan, except for one detail. The CIA used a model of B-26 that had a solid metal nose, while the actual Cuban Air Force B-26 bombers had a transparent plexiglass nose. Journalists, especially at the United Nations where Adlai Stevenson was actively lying about American involvement, spotted the difference almost immediately. Add to that the visible rust and wear patterns that didn't match any Cuban aircraft, and the whole disguise fell apart faster than you can say international incident. The invasion itself failed spectacularly within 3 days, and the cover story didn't even last one. 10. In 1912, an amateur archaeologist named Charles Dawson announced a discovery that sent the scientific world into a frenzy. He claimed to have found the skull of the evolutionary missing link between apes and humans in a gravel pit near Piltdown, England. Scientists named it Piltdown Man and celebrated it as one of the greatest finds in human history. It took 41 years until 1953 for researchers to finally prove that the whole thing was an elaborate fake. The skull was a medieval human cranium, The jaw belonged to an orangutan, and the teeth had been deliberately filed down to look more human-like. Someone had even stained the bones with chemicals to make them appear ancient. For over 4 decades, this Frankenstein fossil sat in the British Museum while scientists built entire theories around it, making Piltdown Man one of the most successful and embarrassing scientific hoaxes ever pulled off. 11. In May 2011, New York Congressman Anthony Weiner had a very bad night on Twitter. He intended to send a private direct message containing a suggestive photo of himself to a woman he'd been chatting with, but instead accidentally posted it publicly to his entire follower list of tens of thousands of people. When the internet predictably exploded, Weiner went on multiple television networks and claimed with a straight face that his account had been hacked. He suggested the photo could have been manipulated and said he couldn't say with certitude whether the photo was even of him. That line alone became instant comedy gold. He hired a lawyer. He demanded investigations. He stuck to the hacking story for over a week before finally crumbling under pressure and admitting that, yes, it was him, and no, nobody hacked anything. His political career never recovered, and his last name made every headline writer's job embarrassingly easy. 12. The 1904 Olympic Marathon in St. Louis is probably the most chaotic athletic event in history, and its biggest scandal involved American runner Fred Lors. He crossed the finish line first, waving triumphantly to the cheering crowd, and was about to receive a gold medal from Alice Roosevelt, the president's daughter, when someone in the audience shouted that Lors was a fraud. Turns out, Lors had dropped out of the race after about 9 miles due to leg cramps, hitched a ride in his manager's car for roughly 11 miles, then hopped out and jogged the final stretch to the finish line as if he'd run the whole thing. He initially tried to play it off as a joke, which nobody found funny. Lors was banned from amateur athletics, though the ban was later lifted. The real winner, Thomas Hicks, had been given doses of strychnine and brandy by his trainers during the race, which honestly makes this entire marathon sound like a fever dream. 13. Enron, the massive Texas-based energy corporation that imploded in 2001, didn't just commit garden-variety financial fraud. They committed nerdy financial fraud. To hide billions of dollars in debt and inflate their profits, Enron's executives created a web of fake offshore shell companies designed to keep toxic assets off the books. The creative part? They named these shell companies after Star Wars characters. There was Chuco Investments, named after Chewbacca. There was JEDI, which stood for Joint Energy Development Investments. There was Kenobi Inc. and Obi-Wan Holdings. Apparently, when you're busy committing one of the largest corporate frauds in American history, you still find time for fandom. When federal investigators started unraveling the scheme, the Star Wars names became an easy shorthand for how absurdly brazen the whole operation was. Enron's collapse wiped out billions in employee pensions and shareholder value, but at least the naming convention was entertaining. 14. On April 26, 1986, reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Soviet Ukraine exploded, releasing massive amounts of radiation into the atmosphere. The Soviet government's initial response was a masterclass in denial. They said nothing. No public statement, no evacuation order, no warning to neighboring countries. Their plan was apparently to just pretend it didn't happen. That strategy worked for exactly 2 days, until workers at the Forsmark nuclear power plant in Sweden, over 1,000 kilometers away, started setting off radiation alarms just by walking through routine security scanners on their way to work. The Swedes initially thought they had their own leak, but when they checked their reactors and found nothing wrong, they traced the radioactive particles back to the Soviet Union. Only after being confronted with evidence from a completely different country did the Soviet government finally admit that yes, something had happened at Chernobyl. Something being one of the worst nuclear disasters in human history. 15. In 1869, a cigar maker and committed atheist named George Hull got into a heated argument with a minister about whether the Bible's claim that giants once walked the earth was literally true. Hull lost the argument, but won the long game. He spent months secretly commissioning a 10-foot-tall figure carved from a massive block of gypsum, had it shipped across the country, and buried it on the farm of his cousin William Newell in Cardiff, New York. A year later, Newell hired workers to dig a well in that exact spot, and surprised they discovered a petrified ancient giant. Hull charged people 50 cents a head just to look at it, later raising the price to $1 when crowds got too large. Newspapers went wild. Experts debated whether it was a genuine petrification or an ancient statue. Hull eventually confessed, but not before P.T. Barnum made his own fake copy and displayed it, arguing his fake of a fake was the real one. America in the 1860s was something else. 16. In May 1960, the Soviet Union shot down an American U-2 spy plane deep inside Soviet territory and captured its pilot, Francis Gary Powers, alive. The Eisenhower administration, believing the pilot couldn't have survived, immediately activated their cover story. It was just an innocent NASA weather research aircraft that had accidentally drifted off course after the pilot blacked out from an oxygen malfunction. They committed hard to this lie. NASA issued press releases. Officials gave interviews. It looked airtight. Then Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev pulled off one of the greatest geopolitical mic drops in Cold War history. He had deliberately waited, letting the Americans dig themselves deeper into their fabricated story, and then announced to the world that not only did they have the plane wreckage, they had the pilot alive and fully cooperating. Powers had confessed everything. The entire American government was caught in a lie on the world stage, and the planned Paris Peace Summit collapsed. 17. In 1995, a British music producer named Ray Santilli released what he claimed was authentic military footage from 1947, showing doctors performing an autopsy on an alien recovered from the Roswell crash site in New Mexico. The grainy black and white footage was sold to Fox Television, which aired it as a special called Alien Autopsy, Fact or Fiction, and pulled in nearly 12 million viewers. People around the world debated whether this was real, classified footage finally leaked to the public. Santilli made a fortune, but skeptics started picking the footage apart frame by frame, and one eagle-eyed viewer noticed something devastating: a modern telephone cord visible on the wall of what was supposed to be a top-secret 1940s military laboratory. That kind of phone cable simply didn't exist in 1947. Santilli held out for years before finally admitting in 2006 that he'd fabricated the footage, though he hilariously claimed it was a reconstruction of a real film he'd once seen, but that had since deteriorated. 18. In the early 1920s, United States Secretary of the Interior Albert Fall pulled off what was, at the time, the most corrupt scandal in American political history. He secretly leased valuable Navy petroleum reserves at Teapot Dome in Wyoming and Elk Hills in California to private oil companies owned by his wealthy friends, Harry Sinclair and Edward Doheny. In exchange, Fall received roughly $400,000 in bribes. And here's the incredible part. Some of that money was literally delivered to him in a little black bag, like a cartoon villain collecting a ransom payment. When investigators started digging, they noticed that Fall, a man on a government salary, had suddenly made extravagant improvements to his New Mexico ranch and was living way beyond his means. He became the first United States cabinet member in history to be sent to prison for crimes committed while in office. The black bag detail remains one of history's least subtle bribery methods. 19. In 1632, Galileo Galilei published his masterwork, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, a brilliant and not-so-subtly sarcastic comparison between the geocentric model, which placed Earth at the center of the universe, and the heliocentric model proposed by Copernicus, which correctly placed the sun at the center. The Catholic Church was furious. They hauled Galileo before the Inquisition in 1633, found him guilty of heresy, forced him to publicly recant, placed him under house arrest for the rest of his life, and banned his book. There was just one spectacular problem with this cover-up strategy. The book had already been published and distributed. Scientists across Europe had already read it, discussed it, and were building on its ideas. Banning a widely circulated book is like trying to unring a bell. The church didn't officially lift the ban until 1835, over 200 years after the scientific community had already moved on without them. 20. For years, Volkswagen marketed its diesel vehicles as clean, efficient, and environmentally friendly, winning over millions of eco-conscious consumers worldwide. Behind the scenes, however, VW had installed what regulators would later call a defeat device, sophisticated software programmed to detect when a car was undergoing an emissions test. During testing, the software would activate full pollution controls, making the car appear compliant. During normal driving on actual roads, those controls quietly switched off, and the cars pumped out nitrogen oxide emissions up to 40 times the legal limit. The scam involved roughly 11 million vehicles worldwide. It all unraveled when researchers at West Virginia University ran real-world driving tests on VW diesels and found the emissions numbers were wildly different from lab results. The resulting scandal, dubbed Dieselgate, cost Volkswagen over $30 billion in fines and settlements and obliterated the company's reputation. Turns out, programming your cars to specifically cheat on tests leaves a pretty obvious paper trail. 21. In 1917, two young cousins in the English village of Cottingley, Elsie Wright, who was 16, and Frances Griffiths, who was 10, claimed they played with fairies in their garden. To prove it, they borrowed Elsie's father's camera and produced photographs showing themselves surrounded by tiny winged creatures. The images eventually reached Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes and a devoted believer in the supernatural. Conan Doyle was completely convinced and published the photos in the Strand magazine, declaring them authentic evidence of fairy existence. Photography experts analyzed the images, and many couldn't definitively prove them fake. The secret? Elsie had drawn the fairies on cardboard, cut them out, and propped them up in the grass using ordinary hat pins. That's it. Paper cutouts and hat pins fooled the man who invented the world's greatest fictional detective. The cousins didn't confess until 1983, over 60 years later. 22. On June 30th, 1908, something exploded in the sky above the remote Tunguska region of Siberia, with a force estimated at 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The blast flattened an estimated 80 million trees across more than 2,000 square kilometers. Seismic stations across Europe registered the event. The night sky over Asia and Europe glowed for days. And the official Russian government response was, essentially, nothing. No investigation, no expedition, no public acknowledgement. The area was so remote, and the Russian Empire was so distracted by political turmoil that they simply pretended it hadn't happened. It took nearly 20 years until 1927, before scientist Leonid Kulik finally organized the first expedition to the blast site. When he arrived, he found an apocalyptic landscape of flattened forest stretching to the horizon in every direction. The strategy of just ignore the massive explosion in Siberia and hope nobody notices remains one of history's boldest forms of denial. 23. In January 2019, actor Jussie Smollett, then a cast member on the hit TV show Empire, told Chicago police that two masked men had attacked him on the street at 2 in the morning, yelled racial and homophobic slurs, poured bleach on him, and tied a noose around his neck. The story made national headlines and triggered a massive outpouring of support. Then, investigators started pulling the thread. It turned out that the two attackers were Abimbola and Olabinjo Osundairo, brothers who personally knew Smollett. And here's the part that makes every detective's job easy. Smollett had paid them $3,500 for the staged attack with a personal check. A traceable, documented, bank-issued personal check with his name on it. He essentially signed a receipt for his own fake hate crime. Smollett was convicted of disorderly conduct in 2021, and the whole fiasco became a cautionary tale about the one thing you should never do when committing fraud: create a paper trail. 24. For roughly 7 centuries, the Catholic Church wielded one of the most powerful legal documents in European history: the donation of Constantine. According to this text, Roman Emperor Constantine the Great had personally granted Pope Sylvester the first supreme authority over the entire Western Roman Empire, including Rome itself, sometime in the 4th century. Popes used this document for hundreds of years to justify their temporal political power and territorial claims. Then, around 1440, an Italian humanist scholar named Lorenzo Valla decided to actually read the thing carefully. What he found was devastating. The document was riddled with medieval Latin expressions, legal terminology, and linguistic patterns that simply did not exist in the 4th century. It was like finding a text message emoji in a Shakespeare play. Valla's analysis conclusively proved it was forged centuries after Constantine's death, likely in the 8th century. The Church quietly stopped referencing it, but never formally admitted to the forgery. 25. Elizabeth Holmes founded Theranos in 2003 with a promise that would revolutionize medicine, a small proprietary device called the Edison that could run hundreds of blood tests from just a single drop of blood. Investors poured in billions. Holmes graced magazine covers. She was hailed as the next Steve Jobs. The cover-up was that the Edison barely worked. It could perform only a tiny fraction of the tests Holmes claimed, and even those results were often wildly inaccurate. So, what did Theranos actually do with the blood samples flowing in from real patients? They secretly ran them on standard commercial machines made by Siemens and other established manufacturers, hidden away in backrooms of their laboratories. Theranos employees were instructed to keep these machines out of sight during investor visits and media tours. Whistleblowers eventually broke the silence. Journalist John Carreyrou at the Wall Street Journal exposed the fraud in 2015, and Holmes was ultimately convicted of fraud and sentenced to over 11 years in prison. 26. In 1983, the German news magazine Stern announced what seemed like the historical scoop of the century. They had acquired 60 volumes of Adolf Hitler's personal diaries, secretly preserved since the end of World War II. Stern paid roughly 9 million Deutsche Marks for the collection and proudly presented them to the world at a massive press conference. Even the renowned British historian Hugh Trevor Roper initially authenticated them. Then forensic scientists got their hands on the diaries. The paper contained chemical whiteners that weren't manufactured until after 1954. The ink contained materials that hadn't been available during the war. The binding included polyester threads that didn't exist in the 1940s. The whole collection had been forged by a man named Konrad Kujau, a Stuttgart-based dealer in Militaria, who had essentially aged his forgeries using tea and other household staining methods. Stern's reputation took a devastating hit, and the Hitler diaries became a textbook example of how desperation for a big story can override basic due diligence. 27. In 2007, John Edwards was a former United States Senator and a serious contender for the Democratic presidential nomination. He was also hiding a secret that would destroy everything: an extramarital affair with campaign videographer Rael Hunter, who was pregnant with his child. Edwards' strategy for concealing this was breathtakingly audacious. He convinced his married aide and close loyalist, Andrew Young, to publicly claim that he, Young, was the father of Hunter's baby. Young, who had his own wife and 3 children, actually went along with this. He stepped in front of cameras and declared paternity of a child that wasn't his, all to protect his boss's presidential ambitions. Edwards even arranged for wealthy donors to secretly funnel hundreds of thousands of dollars to support Hunter while she stayed hidden. The scheme collapsed when Young eventually turned on Edwards, wrote a tell-all book, and handed over a compromising videotape. Edwards admitted paternity in 2010 and faced federal charges for campaign finance violations. 28. On September 29, 1957, a catastrophic explosion ripped through a nuclear waste storage facility at the Mayak plutonium production complex near the city of Kyiv in the Soviet Union. The blast released massive amounts of radioactive contamination across hundreds of square kilometers, forcing the secret evacuation of over 10,000 people from surrounding villages. The Soviet government's cover-up strategy was remarkably creative in a deeply cynical way. They classified the entire disaster, erased affected villages from maps, and then, in 1968, officially designated the heavily contaminated wasteland as the East Ural Nature Reserve. A nature reserve. They took a radioactive exclusion zone where nothing could safely live and rebranded it as a protected wilderness area. The disaster remained completely hidden from the outside world until 1976, when exiled Soviet biologist Joris Medvedev published details in the West. Even the CIA knew about it, but helped keep it quiet, because admitting the Soviets had a nuclear accident would raise uncomfortable questions about American nuclear safety too. 29. When reclusive billionaire Howard Hughes died in 1976 without a known will, his massive fortune became one of the most contested estates in American legal history. Among the various claimants was Melvin Dummer, the owner of a small gas station in Willard, Utah, who produced a handwritten document that he said was Hughes's authentic last will and testament. According to Dummer's story, he had once picked up a disheveled, dirty stranger in the Nevada desert and driven him to the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas. That stranger, Dummer claimed, turned out to be Howard Hughes himself, who was so grateful that he later left Dummer 1/16 of his entire estate, roughly $156 million. The will was examined by forensic document experts, and the problems were immediate. The handwriting didn't convincingly match Hughes's known samples, and most embarrassingly, the document contained a misspelling of Hughes's own corporate entity. Courts ruled the will a forgery, and Dummer never saw a dime. But the story was so cinematically absurd that it became the basis for a Hollywood film. 30. During the Salem witch trials of 1692, the primary evidence used to convict and execute accused witches was something called spectral evidence, testimony from accusers who claimed they could see the ghostly specter of the accused person tormenting them. On the basis of these invisible, unverifiable visions, the courts executed 20 people and imprisoned dozens more. When the hysteria finally began to cool and public opinion shifted, the judges and officials who had enthusiastically sent innocent people to their deaths faced an awkward problem. They needed an excuse. Their solution was to claim that the devil himself had been manipulating the proceedings by disguising himself in the forms of innocent people to deceive the court's eyes. In other words, "The devil tricked us" became the official explanation for executing 20 innocent human beings. The governor of Massachusetts eventually shut down the trials. Spectral evidence was banned from future proceedings, and several judges later publicly apologized, but the damage was irreversibly done. 31. In 1894, Captain Alfred Dreyfus, a French army officer of Jewish descent, was convicted of treason for allegedly passing military secrets to Germany. The conviction was based largely on a handwritten document, known as the bordereau, recovered from the German embassy. There was one glaring problem. The handwriting on the bordereau didn't match Dreyfus's handwriting at all. Military prosecutors knew this, so they invented the concept of autoforgery, arguing that Dreyfus had deliberately disguised his own handwriting to avoid detection. When that wasn't convincing enough, intelligence officer Major Hubert Joseph Henry secretly forged additional documents to strengthen the case. The fraud began to unravel when a new intelligence chief, Lieutenant Colonel Georges Picquart, discovered that the real spy was another officer named Ferdinand Walson Esterhazy. The military tried to silence Picquart by transferring him to a dangerous post in Tunisia. Eventually, writer Émile Zola's explosive open letter, J'accuse, blew the scandal wide open, and Dreyfus was eventually exonerated, but only after spending years imprisoned on Devil's Island for a crime he never committed. 32. In 1982, Atari rushed to develop a video game adaptation of Steven Spielberg's blockbuster film, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, giving the developers just 5.5 weeks to create it. The result was one of the worst video games ever made. A confusing, nearly unplayable mess where the character fell into pits over and over again. Atari had manufactured millions of cartridges expecting massive holiday sales, but the game bombed so catastrophically that it's widely blamed for contributing to the video game industry crash of 1983. Then came the rumors that Atari had secretly buried millions of unsold cartridges in a landfill in Alamogordo, New Mexico, then covered them with a layer of concrete to make sure nobody ever found them. Atari denied it for 3 decades. It became gaming's greatest urban legend. Then, in April 2014, a documentary film crew got permission to excavate the landfill, and there they were. Hundreds of thousands of ET cartridges still in their boxes, pulled from the New Mexico desert. 30 years of denial, undone by a single excavator. 33. On the night of June 17, 1972, a security guard named Frank Wills was making his routine rounds at the Watergate office building in Washington when he noticed a small piece of tape covering the latch on a basement door, preventing it from locking. He removed the tape and continued his rounds. When he came back 30 minutes later, someone had retaped the lock. Wills called the police, and officers discovered 5 men hiding inside the offices of the Democratic National Committee, equipped with wiretapping equipment and cameras. Those men were connected to operatives working for President Richard Nixon's re-election campaign. A single piece of duct tape on a door, left there by burglars who apparently believed in the "it'll be fine" school of criminal planning, set off a chain of events that led to the largest political scandal in American history: congressional investigations, criminal convictions, and the resignation of a sitting president. The Watergate cover-up involved the CIA, the FBI, hush money, and the full weight of the presidency. But it all started because somebody couldn't be bothered to pick a lock properly. 33 cover-ups, and not a single one of them worked. Centuries of lying, forging, erasing, burying, and denying, all for nothing. Now here's what I really want to know, and be honest. What is the biggest lie you ever told that completely blew up in your face? I'm not talking small stuff. I mean the one that still makes you cringe at 3 in the morning. Drop it in the comments, I dare you. Hit like if you enjoyed this, subscribe if you want more, and I'll see you in the next one.